Well, as we just saw, United Nations has been hosting a climate meeting called the Conference of the Parties of this COP every year for over 30 years. Global warming's worst impacts are discussed as delegates from different parts of the world gather in one location to try to find solutions. One of the world's biggest oil and gas dependent nation is hosting COP for the second year in a row. While governments are speaking the language, they are not funding the movement entirely. Take a look at this next report to know more.
Nations must reach their emissions objectives within the next decade to prevent catastrophic levels of global warming. Over 200 nations will gather in Azerbaijan for the next 2 weeks to discuss a new climate financing target. The primary objective is to assist the world's poorest economies in decarbonizing and adapting to increasing temperatures. This could be worth multi-trillion dollars per annum. However, climate champions are looking at private equity rather than governments for this initiative. At the outset of the COP29 meeting, developed nations assumed that sources beyond their control would provide a disproportionate share of the promised funds, mainly because these countries are feeling the pinch of a crunch in finances. The private sector will be a big part of this through various forms of innovative financing and lending. Extremely indebted developing nations are already fighting against the complex and expensive plan to increase private financing. Additionally, the plan begs the essential question: how can countries require non-UN entities to generate hundreds of billions of dollars? Whether or not any fresh promises made in Baku this year are credible will depend on this response. More importantly, all eyes will be on concrete plans backed by money. This comes as previous meetings have, at best, ended with new jargon rather than clear, actionable and accountable steps. There is talk of commercial banks and multilateral development banks like the World Bank playing a larger role. Another major obstacle is Donald Trump's victory. There is significant uncertainty about the Trump administration's future commitments to global funding. The US is the largest shareholder in most of these institutions, including the World Bank. However, Trump has taken a somewhat different tone when it comes to supporting climate goals. Meanwhile, the COP process has even less control over the funding flows of private financial institutions. Much of Wall Street has spent the past year rolling back its green commitments or betting against clean energy and climate tech. Bankers and investors have repeatedly made clear they will only put money where there's profit. So the real question is, will COP29 be another annual event or have a greater impact this time around? Business Bureau, WION World is One.
All right, to discuss more, we have with us Erik Solheim, former Executive Director of the UN Environment Program and the former Minister of Climate and Environment of Norway. He is joining us live from Baku, Azerbaijan.
Happy to be with you.
Thank you so much. Now, you are in Baku, and it's been 3 days on. Do you think there has been any substantial lead into this climate, or we're calling it the COP finance? Do we see any conclusion, any leads so far?
In fact, there is a breakthrough here in Baku. It may seem a bit technical to people outside, but it has massive consequences. And that is agreement on the framework for the global carbon market, which can mobilize big money. In India, for example, you can mobilize money for the wonderful natural farming in Andhra Pradesh, for the management of mangroves in Tamil Nadu, for tree planting in Madhya Pradesh, for the overall fantastic green developments in Gujarat. India and Sri Lanka and Nepal and many other Asian nations can get big money from the carbon market. That will be from airlines, from tech companies, from pharmaceutical companies. But now there is an agreement on the system for this. And this money is much easier, much bigger than any money through the multilateral system.
Right, and that you just mentioned that, yes, the numbers are a bit confusing and a lot of people do not understand that, but you probably can explain it to us how climate finance has been plagued by acquisitions of exaggerated numbers. I know this must have been discussed in the COP, and poor transparency in money that is going on to questionable places.
Look, the climate talks are mainly among diplomats, and I'm sorry to say, but many diplomats have very limited understanding of finance. They also have very limited understanding of how to actually build a solar farm or how to build the windmills or the hydro project which we need out in the real world. So they don't really understand the economics, and then we go into any number of quarrels which those only give meaning in the diplomatic world. If you look to the real world, the world of politics, the world of economics, a lot is happening. Look, the state of Gujarat in India has an ambition of 100 gigawatts of renewable solar and wind, and they're well on the way to establishing this. That's where the change is, not in the talks where diplomats come together and, yes, achieve limited progress.
Right. And of course, there's one more topic that has been touched upon as the COP started. Many big leaders have not attended. Now, however, a U.S. delegation is saying that it is preparing to Trump-proof the nuclear expansion plans at COP29. Are the plans really possible, given that the U.S. president's stance on climate?
Look, there is a huge anger directed towards the United States of America. I mean, the one nation which more than any other nation in the world has created the climate mess now say, well, the rest of the world should sort out the mess we created. You listen to Prime Minister Yunus from Bangladesh. I mean, he said this very, very clearly, and that anger, I think, is felt by Europe, by India, by China, by all the developing world. How come the one nation, which more than anyone created the problem, are now leaving to the rest of the world to sort it out? I mean, U.S. emissions per capita up to today are 8 times the Chinese, 25 times Indian, and even bigger discrepancy if you compare to small island development states or to Africa. So we need the U.S. Still, there are 2 reasons to be optimistic. I mean, U.S. was not leading during Biden either. It's China, which is now the indispensable nation for the green transformation. 60% of all green developments are now coming in China alone. Next to China, it's India and Europe, which is leading the world. And also, of course, in the United States, fortunately, there are many other forces. State of California is a huge economy. They will continue to go green. And many American business would understand the opportunities. I mean, if Detroit are not making electric cars, well, they will leave the entire electric car market to China and others. So American business understand that they need that climate is an opportunity to go green. But unfortunately, at the moment, there's limited understanding at the top level of politics.
Right. And that being said, now we know that some big countries are not taking part and people are angry about it. With that being said, do you think the $1 trillion package is do you think that can be solved and can be achieved during this COP29?
I think it'd be very difficult to get other nations to pay a big in the diplomatic on the diplomatic arena when the United States will not do that. But again, the real action in the world is not in the diplomacy. We have met this the 29th climate talks. The main change is not there. The main change is out in the reality. The price of solar is now so low that any nation which move from coal to solar save money. That's, of course, why China and India and Indonesia and so many others doing exactly that. Vietnam, because it's an income-generating project to go from coal to solar. You use your own domestic resources. I mean, the sun is Indian, the wind is Chinese, the hydropower is Indonesian. You don't import oil from Saudi Arabia or Russia or my nation, Norway. You base development on your own resources. And that's what is now driving the change, not the talks among diplomats.
Right. And with that note, of course, we are expecting something positive to come out of COP29. Thank you so much, Dr. Arnold Solomon, to joining us and giving your perspective.